Before dawn, a senior royal confirmed what Britain feared most. King Charles is entering his final days. A blunt palace statement ended all hope, replacing reassurance with truth. Doctors say treatment has stopped. Family members were summoned to Windsor. Children were rushed to say goodbye. This is not rumor or speculation. It is confirmation. The monarchy has shifted from management to farewell, and a nation is waking to the reality that the crown is about to change hands within days ahead. The king is dying. Senior royals confirm devastating truth. At 4:47 a.m., the palace released a statement that pierced through decades of carefully managed royal language. King Charles is receiving end-of-life care. There was no softening, no talk of observation, no hints of recovery. Just 29 words. Cold, clear, final. The shift from reassurance to resignation happened within hours. Only the night before, palace officials had told select journalists that the king was responding well to treatment. That narrative, it turned out, was already obsolete. Behind the scenes, the change in tone wasn't just medical, it was personal. Princess Anne, the king's sister, was the first senior royal to utter the words privately. There is no more treatment left. She had been by Charles's side at Windsor Castle, sleeping in the adjacent guest chamber for several nights. When the medical team delivered the latest findings shortly after midnight, Anne didn't flinch. She asked one question. Does he know? By then, the king had been told. Inside Buckingham Palace, phones rang silently, secure, direct lines connecting senior royals to one another. A private directive went out just after 1 a.m. All senior family to Windsor, no delay. There was no time to prepare the public or manage narrative flow. The palace press office had drafted 3 versions of a potential update. None of them were used. Instead, the king himself, while still conscious, gave his consent to the final line. Let them know. No more buffers. That was the phrase that changed everything. It marked the end of the silence. Royal family races to Windsor after confirmation. 3 o'clock in the morning. In the stillness of Adelaide Cottage, the royal residence near Windsor, Prince William's phone lit up. He answered it on the first ring. The voice on the other end was calm, direct, and clinical. Dr. Sarah Chen, lead physician to the monarch. There were no pleasantries, no build-up.
The king's systems are failing. It's time.
That was all William needed to hear. He didn't ask for timelines or reassurances. He simply looked over to Catherine, who had stirred the moment he sat up. He spoke just one line, quietly, but with certainty. Wake the children. They have to see him. There may not be another chance. There was no panic, only movement. Within minutes, the Prince and Princess of Wales were helping dress their 3 children. George was quiet, face pale and drawn. He already understood more than most 9-year-olds ever should. Charlotte, ever composed, asked no questions, her silence a mirror of her mother's. Louis, younger, confused, asked the only thing that mattered to him.
Will Grandpa talk to us?
Catherine had no answer. She simply embraced him. Downstairs, members of the Royal Protection Command were already forming a high-speed convoy. 3 black SUVs, unmarked but unmistakably royal, pulled out from the cottage just before 3:45 a.m., escorted by police motorbikes and shadowed by plainclothes security. The streets of central London were deserted, but traffic lights were overridden, roads cleared by invisible orders. As the convoy headed west, time took on a strange weight, fast in motion, but painfully slow in thought. William sat in the front vehicle, eyes fixed forward. Catherine sat between the children in the rear, holding their hands without speaking. While they raced toward Windsor Castle, others were already there. Princess Anne had not left her brother's side in over 36 hours. She slept in short intervals on a small couch near the bed. She had been the first to accept the truth, the first to see the irreversible signs, the irregular breathing, the diminishing focus, the increasing silences. Doctors came and went. They updated her in medical terms. She responded only with nods. Her presence was the only constant in the room, a steady heartbeat in the final hours of a fading monarch. Queen Camilla had not left either. Dressed in black already, though no announcement had been made, she remained seated by King Charles's bedside, holding his hand through moments of lucidity and longer stretches of confusion. She whispered to him even when he could no longer reply. Every time his eyes fluttered open, he saw her face. And each time he gripped her hand as if to say, "You stayed." 4 a.m. The Wales family arrived at Windsor Castle. There were no cameras, no formal entrances. Aides ushered them quickly through a side gate, one long reserved for private arrivals. No one explained anything to the children. There was no protocol for this, not for how to explain the waiting room of death to a young royal. All that was asked of them was presence. George, Charlotte, and Louis were led to a private antechamber just off the main suite. Catherine sat with them, while William entered the king's private quarters alone. In the room, nothing had changed. The smell of flowers, the low beep of medical monitors, the soft murmurs of staff. And in the center, King Charles, eyes closed, breath shallow, time slipping. William stood quietly at the door. He did not speak. He only watched. A few feet away, Anne looked up. She gave a single nod, an acknowledgement between siblings, both holding back a tide of emotion. Minutes later, across the nation, newsrooms began preparing, prompted by unseen signals. At 4:47 a.m., the world was told what the family had already accepted. King Charles is receiving end-of-life care. No euphemism, no delay. The monarchy had chosen truth, and the clock had begun its final countdown. Charles's condition shifts from manageable to terminal. Just 3 days earlier, the tone surrounding King Charles's health had still been measured, careful, cautious, but not despairing. Medical bulletins used phrases designed to steady the nation. Serious but treatable, closely monitored, responding to care. Inside the palace, Charles was described as fatigued but alert. He read state documents in short intervals. He spoke briefly with ministers by secure line. He even agreed to a short, carefully framed photograph in the palace gardens, smiling faintly, leaning slightly on a cane. It was meant to reassure. But that image was already out of date. On Tuesday afternoon, a routine scan, initially ordered as precaution, revealed what doctors had feared but hoped not to confirm. The results were immediate and devastating. The cancer had metastasized, not slowly, not marginally, aggressively. Multiple organs were now showing signs of failure. The disease had spread beyond any remaining margin of control. What had once been treatable had crossed into something else entirely. That same evening, an emergency consultation was convened in the king's private quarters at Windsor Castle. Present were senior oncologists, neurologists, and royal physicians. At the center of the room stood Dr. Sarah Chen, the royal medical lead, her expression grave. She did not soften her language. "This is end stage," she said. We are no longer treating. We are preparing. There was no disagreement, no debate, no alternate plan. The room fell silent, not from shock, but from finality. When King Charles was informed, he listened without interruption. He did not ask for optimism. He did not ask for miracles. He asked only one question, quietly and directly. How long? The answer was delivered with painful honesty. Days, Dr. Chen said. A week, if we're fortunate. There were no emotional outbursts, no denial. Just a long, heavy silence that stretched across the room. Charles nodded once, absorbing the truth not as a monarch, but as a man who had waited his entire life for a crown he would barely wear. Moments later, he made his next request. I want to see William, alone. The meeting took place in a small sitting room adjoining his bedchamber. No aides, no advisors, no legal counsel, just father and son. They spoke in hushed tones, not for long, but long enough. It was not only a farewell, it was a transfer. Charles spoke of constitutional matters briefly, succession, continuity, restraint. But most of what he said was personal, about endurance, about patience, about the loneliness of leadership. Before William left, Charles handed him a sealed letter. This is for after, he said. Not before. The contents were not disclosed. No copies were made. It was placed in William's inside pocket, close to the heart. From that moment on, the king's final days were numbered, not by speculation, but by certainty. And with that knowledge, the monarchy shifted from management to preparation. Not if the crown would pass, but when, and time, once generous, had become unforgiving. Prepare the nation. Why the palace made it public. For decades, the monarchy relied on silence as protection. Illness was softened, decline was delayed. The public was told only fragments, often long after the family had already faced the truth in private. But this time, that approach collapsed. Inside Windsor Castle, the discussion was no longer about if the public should be told, but how long the truth could be withheld. King Charles's condition was deteriorating rapidly. His absences were no longer subtle. His voice had faded from public life. Rumors had begun circulating faster than official updates. Silence was no longer neutral. It was damaging credibility. During a brief moment of clarity, King Charles himself ended the debate. His breathing was labored, his strength diminished, but his intention was unmistakable. Let them know, he said. No more buffers. That instruction changed everything. Sir Clive Alderton, the king's most trusted senior aide, was tasked with drafting the statement. Traditional royal language was rejected almost immediately. There would be no phrases like under observation or responding to care. The wording would be direct, factual, and final. Every sentence was reviewed line by line. Princess Anne, Prince William, and Queen Camilla were consulted individually, and then together. There was no disagreement. All understood the cost of delay. If the king was losing consciousness, the truth had to be spoken while he could still authorize it. Even the timing was deliberate. The statement would be released at 4:47 a.m. Not to hide it, but to control it. The palace wanted Britain to wake to truth, not to rumor, leaks, or speculation. By dawn, the nation would already know. And when the words went out, end-of-life care, there was no confusion left to manage. William's reaction. The children need to say goodbye. Grief did not paralyze Prince William. It sharpened him. When the medical confirmation arrived, his first response was not constitutional. It was personal. He understood something instinctively. Lost moments cannot be repaired later. And memory, especially for children, is fragile. He turned to Catherine and said quietly, "George will remember this forever." Then, more firmly, "If we don't let him go now, it'll haunt him." There was no argument, no hesitation. Before dawn, George, Charlotte, and Louis were woken gently. No titles were used, no ceremonial language, just truth, shaped carefully for young hearts. Catherine knelt beside their beds and spoke softly. "Grandpa is very sick. We're going to see him." George understood immediately. He didn't cry. He simply nodded, too still for his age. Charlotte asked if he would be in pain. Louis, confused and wide-eyed, repeated the same question. "Will Grandpa still talk to us?" No one promised what they could not guarantee. The drive to Windsor Castle was silent. No conversation, no distractions, just the low hum of the road and the weight of what waited ahead. As the convoy passed through the castle gates shortly after sunrise, William felt the reality settle fully. This was no longer preparation. This was goodbye. Last conversations. What the king said to his family. Inside the king's private chamber, time narrowed. When Prince William entered, King Charles opened his eyes slowly. Recognition came with effort, but it came. His voice was little more than breath. "You came," he whispered. William knelt beside him, unable to speak at first. This was not a moment for titles or duty. It was father and son, alone with the truth. Charles reached for clarity one last time. "It's not a burden," he said. "It's a gift. I was proud every day." The words were not instruction. They were reassurance. When Catherine approached, Charles squeezed her hand weakly. He thanked her, not for protocol, but for steadiness, for holding the family together when the ground beneath them kept shifting. Then the children were brought in. To George, Charles spoke slowly, carefully. "Being king isn't about crowns," he said. "It's about service. Power means helping those with none." To Charlotte, he smiled faintly and told her to stay curious, to stay kind. To Louis, he managed a soft laugh when the boy asked if he could bring drawings next time. There would be no next time. Princess Anne stood quietly nearby, unmoving, watchful. When Charles turned to her, his voice steadied for a brief moment. "You were always the strong one," he said. "William will need that now." Anne nodded once. No words, no tears, not yet. As the hours passed, clarity faded, but those final sentences, spoken with effort, intention, and love, remained. Not proclamations, not legacy statements, just truth passed quietly before the crown had to move on. "Your Majesty, William's title changes as death nears." Inside Windsor Castle, the room had gone still. Dr. Sarah Chen, the king's lead physician, stood beside the bed and looked at Prince William. "The next breath may be his last. You need to prepare." There was no shock left, just breathless silence. At 8:43 a.m., King Charles III passed away, peacefully, surrounded by family. There was no sudden motion, no final words, just a soft exhale and stillness. It was Princess Anne who first acknowledged what had happened. She stepped back from the bed and closed her eyes. The moment had arrived. Queen Camilla, seated beside Charles, clutched his hand and bowed her head. She didn't speak. She didn't stand. Her tears were silent, constant. And then everything changed. William remained at the foot of the bed. In the eyes of the law, he was now king, not by ceremony, not by oath, but by death. A knock at the door. Sir Clive Alderton, Charles's longtime private secretary, entered and spoke with measured calm. "Your Majesty, there are documents requiring your attention." William didn't answer at first. The title hung in the air. New, uncomfortable, real. "Your Majesty," two words that now belonged to him, not out of ambition, but inevitability. He looked to his father, not as monarch, but as son. He whispered, "You did it your way. I just hope I can." Moments later, a red folder was placed before him, the death proclamation. He signed it at 9:15 a.m., his hand steady, but his face unreadable. Across the country, church bells began to toll. Flags lowered, television anchors changed into black. But inside that room, it was still just a family in mourning. The crown had moved, but William hadn't. Not yet. The crown moves, but grief stays. Transition begins. As King Charles's death was confirmed, constitutional machinery surged forward, but grief refused to obey the same pace. Queen Camilla, who had remained stoic throughout Charles's illness, broke the moment he died. Her head fell forward, and for several minutes she didn't speak. She held his hand even after his last breath. "He wasn't ready to go," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. William, now King William V, stood near the window, staring into the gardens. He was wearing a black suit, not robes. No crown had been placed on his head, but the reality was written in the eyes of every aide that passed him. He was the monarch now. Catherine took quiet command. She gently guided the children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, out of the room. They had seen their grandfather one last time. Now she would protect that memory. The door closed softly behind them, and the room seemed to shrink. At 9:15 a.m., William signed the formal death proclamation. His name appeared beneath his father's. It was the final act that tied their reigns together. Father and son, monarch and heir, legacy and future. Outside the chamber, the tone was different. Uniformed officers moved briskly. Palace staff shifted into ceremonial roles. Mourning banners were unfolded. The royal standard was lowered. Orders from long-standing funeral plans, known internally as Operation Menai Bridge, were now active. Across London, news agencies interrupted programming. The BBC began a marathon of black-and-white retrospectives. Global leaders began issuing tributes. But inside the castle, it was quiet. Anne was already organizing next steps. Camilla remained in her chair. And William? He was handed his first red box, the signature briefcase containing state papers. He opened it, scanned it, then closed it. "Not yet," he said. The world had changed, but grief was still catching up. Tell Harry, the call that came too late. In Montecito, California, it was the middle of the night when Prince Harry's phone rang. 2:21 a.m. Local time. It was Princess Anne. Her voice was firm but gentle. "Your father is dying, Harry. If you want to see him, you need to come now." There was no panic, only urgency. Harry sat up in bed. Meghan woke beside him. He shook his head and simply said, "I need to go alone." Within the hour, a private jet had been secured. The palace had arranged clearances. Flight crews had been placed on standby weeks earlier. But even speed has limits when distance is measured in thousands of miles. While Harry was in the air, the official statement from Buckingham Palace was released. King Charles is receiving end-of-life care. The public was now aware, but Harry wasn't. He was still in the air, unreachable. At 38,000 feet, Harry refreshed his phone. One message stood out. "He's gone." It was followed by a missed call from William. When the two finally connected, it was William who spoke first. He passed peacefully. "I'm sorry. You didn't make it." Harry, according to close sources, didn't speak for several seconds. Then quietly, I was trying so hard." He wept alone in the aircraft's cabin. This wasn't just about missing a final moment. It was about distance, emotional and geographic. He had wanted to be there. He had tried. But time, once again, had moved faster than forgiveness. And now, the man they had both called father was gone. One brother became king. The other arrived too late. A kingdom mourns, a son becomes king. The sun had barely cleared the rooftops of Windsor Castle, but already a nation was in mourning. Inside the royal residence, King William V stood in the same chamber where his father had died just over an hour before. The death proclamation had been signed. The accession council was being summoned. The machinery of monarchy was already moving at full speed. But William hadn't yet moved with it. He sat in silence, hands folded, eyes on the empty chair across from him, the one King Charles III had always used during their briefings.
"I wish I could speak to you as a son," William would later say.
Not as a sovereign. The words would become his first public address as king, short, controlled, barely holding emotion, but unmistakably human. He died with grace. He lived with service. I carry not just his title, but his burden. In the background, preparations were being made. Black drapes covered portraits in the palace. Union flags flew at half-staff. Tolling bells echoed across London, from St. Paul's Cathedral to Westminster Abbey. Camilla, red-eyed and drained, remained in her private rooms. She declined all interviews and briefings. Her grief, aides said, was off-limits to protocol. Princess Anne fielded calls from global leaders, foreign dignitaries, and Commonwealth nations. She managed logistics with almost mechanical precision, but those close to her said her eyes rarely left her phone, as if waiting for one more message from Charles that would never come. Catherine, now Queen Consort, focused only on the children. She explained gently what the coming days would bring: ceremonies, appearances, black clothing. George asked if he'd now be king one day. She nodded, but said, "Only when the world needs you." Harry, still in transit when the death was announced, arrived late that afternoon. He entered through a side gate. No photographers, no press. William met him privately. There were no speeches, no reconciliation, just two brothers in a quiet room, one newly crowned, the other arriving too late. That night, the palace released one final statement. King William V has formally ascended the throne. The United Kingdom mourns His Majesty King Charles III, whose life of service remains etched in our history. In the shadows of that moment, the crown had passed from one hand to another, not through triumph, but through loss. And while the world now addressed him as Your Majesty, William remained, for one final night, just a son in mourning. The weight of legacy, the echo of his father's final words, and the grief of a nation now lived side by side in the man who would lead Britain into a future shaped by absence and responsibility. The confirmation did not bring comfort, but it brought clarity. King Charles chose honesty in his final chapter, allowing the country to grieve while he still lives. Inside Windsor, family gathered, words were said, and goodbyes began. Outside, the machinery of monarchy moved forward, even as hearts lagged behind. Britain now stands between sorrow and succession, united in quiet respect. Whatever comes next, this moment will be remembered not for ceremony, but for truth. Spoken plainly, carried gently, and shared when silence could no longer protect anyone. It reshapes legacy, duty, and farewell for generations to come across Britain and beyond.